I'd like to start from one of the slides of Paul, when he said that CEOs focus on the internal working of their organizations, making the most of their staff and making sure the customer relationship is good. Well, Teresa Amabile from Harvard wrote a very good book about all this, about what she calls the progress principle. And she explains, and I will try to show you this, she explains how innovation can be fostered within an organization through what she calls organizational innovation. And this organizational innovation feeds also creativity which is more at the personal level of each members of the staff, while innovation is the bigger result of this creativity by all the staff. So what are the triggers? Well, fundamentally expertise, creativity, skills, but mainly motivation. And I'd like to point something very important. You cannot motivate somebody else. You can only motivate yourself. So a manager can only create an environment in which people do not have obstacles to be motivated for their job. At the level of innovation, there are, of course, resources, managerial practices, and organizational motivation as a whole. Managerial practices are the set of practices of managers in order indeed to foster innovation, to foster the way people work within the organization. And that's what we really need to foster and develop. And I will try to sketch how the digital workplace can contribute to this or not. So we've got Dov Seidman, he's the boss of LRN, a consultancy, and they've published a very good report on what they call how we can make the organization within companies work better. And they distinguished, through their survey of about 2,000 companies, they distinguished three types of companies. The first one is what they call blind obedience. I don't need to tell you much about it. It's clear. It's where you are told what you have to do and just execute. Informed acquiescence is a little bit more subtle, and you try to motivate people, especially through extrinsic motivation, like salaries, perks, and all the rest, promotions. And then there is the last one, self-governance, where autonomy is fostered within the organization. And in terms of the result of, let's say, innovation, the results are very different. You can see that blind obedience scores very low, while self-governance scores much, much better. So what are the basic principles behind those self-governing organizations? And when I mean self-governing, it doesn't mean that everybody does what he wants. It's much more subtle than this. The principles are very simple to state, but very difficult to put in practice. The first one is trust. Trusting your colleagues. And recently somebody asked me, but how can you make sure that people trust you? Well, it's very simple. You trust them first. So you need to make that leap of faith, let's say, and to organize for it. And to create a culture where people can be as autonomous as they would like to, or they are capable of. It's not everybody's cup of tea, let's say, at least at the start, but when you create an environment in which people feel they can take initiative, then it grows and the maturity of the company or the organization grows too. The results are astounding, based at least on the LRN study. 32 times more risk-taking initiatives, 11 times more innovation practices, 6 times better performance. That's the first principle. The second one is purpose. To have a clear purpose. It seems obvious, but I tell you, as a former president of the Ministry of Transport in Belgium, it was not clear at all when I started my job there that there was a clear purpose for everybody. So to make sure that this purpose is clear internally, externally, that you monitor the progress towards this purpose, that everybody is contributed to the development of this purpose is essential, so that people are aligned and they can be all the more autonomous and still do what's good for the organization if the purpose is clear. Once again, if the purpose is clear, the results are very good. 80 times more long-term orientation, 6 times more resilience, 8 times more good decision making. If you want more details about all those figures, look at the LRN How survey. It's on the web, it's easy to find, and it's very, very interesting. The third principle is also very obvious and evident, and still, unfortunately, not put a lot in practice in many organizations. It is to make sure people feel they are progressing, and not just as professionals, but as human beings. If they feel they are progressing as human beings within the organization, if the organization is not an obstacle for them to progress as human beings, then they will really do their best within the company, and they will self-deploy, and it will be beneficial for them and for the organization. But you need to put in place systems whereby people feel they are progressing, where they get recognition for their progresses. And those recognitions cannot just be extrinsic motivation, like perks, like promotions, etc. They are much more subtle than this. They start with courageous conversations with your colleagues, with your hierarchy, etc. Once again, if you put all this in place, results are very, very good. 5 times more authentically dedicated, 8 times more deeply accountable, and more deeply responsible. Now, the big question is, will technology and the digital workplace help to contribute to the dissemination, let's say, or the putting in place of those, or the respect of those principles? And there, I would say we need to be very cautious. Already in ancient Greece, they used this term pharmakon. And pharmakon meant a remedy and a poison. And I do believe, very simply, that technology can be a remedy, can help to put those principles in practice, but it can also destroy them. It all depends on how we will use technology. Let me just give you a few examples on this. As I said, at the Ministry of Transport, we did quite a reorganization. You see here one of the former organizations. It was all closed offices, like most of the commission offices today. And it looked a little bit like this. And then we transformed it into what we call dynamic office, open landscape for everybody. And I say everybody, that was including me as president, the director generals, etc. We did not have an office and not an assigned desk. It's very important that it would be for everybody and not just for most people, but not for the bosses. And it looks like this. The results have been very good in terms of all what I just told you, but of course you cannot see the digital part of it. It's all furniture here. So the digital part was basically to change the way we worked. And mainly, and I will give just a few examples, we stopped clocking in and clocking out. You didn't need to do this. But instead, we replaced this by clear, objective purposes for everybody. So that was suppressed. We also facilitated teleworking, so up to 3 days a week. We also went to the cloud so that all the files were accessible anywhere, anytime, by all the staff, would they be working at home or in the train or whatever. Video conferencing was much more easier, etc. But that's just a few examples to show how trust can be increased. The bad way to do so is what you see already in some companies, where people are constantly monitored on every move they do. I mean, some employees now, cannot just go to the toilets without being, already known by their bosses that they are doing that. It's just crazy. They even monitor their health constantly. Now, you can take that as something positive, but you can take that also as something very oppressive. So these are ways where you see technology can be a pharmacon. In terms of purpose, it's just the same. You can use technology to reinforce the pursuit of pure financial objectives, but you could use it also to better monitor your progress in terms of your societal and environmental impact. And finally, in terms of progress, there are today numerous tools which are developed, like this one by Telium, trying to give tools that facilitate such a self-governing approach. And I don't need to tell you, and I don't have time, but there are all kinds of ways to facilitate the self-governance approach in terms of holacracy, sociocracy, etc. And those management tools can help that. What's important here is that this one is developed as an open source initiative so that it doesn't cost anything basically to use it, and it will hopefully be used by many companies who are trying to be more self-governing. So, in a nutshell, I would like to stop by saying digital workplace for the future. Well, it will depend how far technology will be at the service of those three very simple but very important principles: trust, purpose, and progress. Thank you.